The rider came up from the south, following the creek road, and she watched him from the window, the way you watch weather, not alarmed, not yet, just measuring. Spring had come in hard this year. The grass was already pushing through the frost-pale ground, and the cottonwoods along the creek had gone that particular shade of yellow-green that meant everything was about to move fast, whether you were ready or not. She had been ready for 14 months. She had been ready for 4 years before that. The cabin sat on a low rise, which she had chosen deliberately. You could see the road from the window. You could see who was coming and how fast. The rider was not one of the three. She had learned to read them at distance. The banker rode upright and slow, like a man who believed the road existed for him. The rancher rode with his shoulders forward, always appearing slightly annoyed to still be traveling. The land agent hunched. She could pick any of them out a quarter mile off. This one sat easy in the saddle, not relaxed exactly, but settled, like a man who had been riding a long time and had stopped fighting it. She watched until he reached the fork and turned east, away from her road, and then she let out a breath she had not catalogued herself holding. Behind her, the cabin was exactly what she had made it. The floor was level. She had relaid it twice to get it right. The south wall was double-chinked against the wind that came through in January like it meant to collect a debt. The root cellar door fit flush, which had taken her the better part of a week and which her husband had watched from the doorway without comment, already too tired by then to pretend he might help. She did not think about him often. When she did, it was practical. What he had left, which was nothing, and what she had built anyway, which was this. 120 acres, a well she had dug herself with hired help she'd paid in eggs and mending for 3 months, a fence line that ran true, a kitchen garden that was just now starting to show its first tentative green along the southern edge. All of it hers, all of it disputed. She put her hand into her apron pocket and felt the folded paper without taking it out. She had written it 4 days ago, in the hour before dawn when the words came plainest. Practical arrangement. Widow, landowner, 120 acres outside Harlan's Crossing. Seeks man of sober habits willing to lend name to a legal matter. Room and meals in exchange. Duration negotiable. She had read it back to herself twice and felt neither proud nor ashamed, only clear. The territorial paper went out on Thursdays. Today was Wednesday. Outside, the creek road was empty again. The cottonwoods moved. The grass bent and recovered in the wind, the way grass does, without drama, without stopping. She sent it the next morning. She walked to town before the heat settled in, the paper folded twice in her apron pocket, and handed it across the counter at the territorial office without a word of explanation. The man behind the counter read it without expression and told her it would run Thursday. She thanked him. She walked back out into the sun. That was the end of one thing and the beginning of another, and she did not dwell on the line between them. The first week passed, then the second. She did not watch the road. She had fencing to walk, and the kitchen garden was pushing up in earnest now, needing thinning. The root cellar wanted a new brace on the eastern shelf. She'd noticed it listing in February and kept putting it off. She fixed it herself on a Tuesday afternoon, on her knees in the dark with a lantern and a hammer, and when she was done, she sat there a moment in the cool and the quiet, and let herself breathe. The third week, on a Thursday, he arrived. She heard about it from the boy before she saw it herself. He came running along the property line in the late afternoon, 7 years old and serious the way children are when they are carrying information they consider important. "There's a man at the store asking for you by name," he said, slightly out of breath. "He's got a bag." She set down her trowel. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Just the one bag?" the boy thought, "and a roll of something, tied with cord." She nodded. She put the trowel in the bucket and walked back to the cabin to wash her face. He was already at the end of the creek road when she came back out. He had walked from town rather than waiting. He stopped at the edge of her property and did not come further. The canvas bag was over one shoulder. The roll of tools was tucked under the other arm, tied with brown cord, and it was not large. He was not large, not small either, just a man of a certain economy, the kind that does not expand to fill a room and does not apologize for it. She walked out to meet him at the fence line. He said, "You're the woman who placed the notice." She said, "I am." He nodded, as if that confirmed something. He looked at the fence line, briefly, then back at her. "The offer stands as written," she said. "Room and meals. The legal matter is the point of it." "I understood that," he said. 4 days later, they stood before the Justice of the Peace on a Wednesday morning. The dry goods woman stood against the wall with her hands folded and her expression neutral, asking nothing. 11 minutes. She signed where she was told to sign. He signed below her name. They walked back out into the morning light. He picked up his bag. The morning after, she was at the well when she heard the rider come up the road. She knew the horse before she knew the man. A tall bay, well kept, with the kind of tack that costs more than it needs to. She straightened and waited. The banker was perhaps 50, with a face like a closed ledger, everything recorded, nothing visible. He dismounted at the fence line and came through the gate without asking. That was the first thing. She set the bucket down. He spoke to her the way men like him speak to women they have already decided are temporary, pleasantly, carefully, as if she were a problem that had not yet been explained to her. He spoke about her late husband's obligations. He spoke about the difficulty of a woman managing acreage alone. He spoke about an offer he had drawn up, fair terms. She would find it generous. It would of course need to be settled before the county's spring assessments. She was aware, without turning, that the stranger had come out of the cabin. He crossed the yard at a pace that was not hurried, and stopped perhaps 6 feet behind her left shoulder. He did not speak. He simply occupied the space, the canvas of his shirt not quite dry from the morning's work, looking at the banker with an expression that had nothing in it. The banker's sentence lost its shape. He recovered it, redirected it, addressed some of it toward the stranger as though the stranger were a wall that had inconveniently appeared. The stranger said 4 words. She owns it outright. That was all. The banker's mouth adjusted. He looked at the stranger for a moment, and then at her, and then back at the stranger. And whatever calculation he had ridden in with was not coming out even anymore. He folded the paper he'd been holding and put it in his coat. He said something about the county assessments being a matter for proper channels. He remounted and rode back down the road without looking at either of them. She waited until the sound of the hooves thinned out to nothing. Then she picked up the bucket and went back to the cabin, and the stranger returned to whatever he had been doing without her asking what that was. She found it that evening. The post at the southeast corner of the fence, the one that had been working loose since October, that she had noted twice in her mind and not yet gotten to, was solid. Set clean in the ground, the rails fitted back against it, the wood aligned. She pressed her hand to it, and it did not move. At the top of the post, driven flush into the grain, was a single iron nail. She looked at it for a moment. She did not look toward the cabin. She took her hand off the post and walked back through the yard, the light going long and yellow across the grass, and went inside. 3 days later, a buckboard came up the road at mid-morning, moving at the unhurried pace of a man who does not believe he will be turned away. She was at the garden when she heard it. She straightened, brushed her hands against her apron, and waited. He was broad through the chest, the neighboring rancher, with good boots and a hat that was not cheap. He smiled before he had even pulled the horse to a stop, the kind of smile that had been used often enough it no longer required any real effort. He climbed down, looped the reins, and walked toward her with his hat already in his hand. He said it was a fine morning. She agreed that it was. He said he hoped she was settling in well, the two of them, and she said they were. He looked around at the fence line, at the cabin, at the garden where she had been kneeling. His eyes moved the way a man's eyes move when he is calculating and wants you to believe he is merely admiring. He said he had been meaning to come by, that he had always thought this particular parcel sat well in the valley, that the soil along the lower field looked like it held water. She said it did. He named a figure. He named it carefully, the way you name something you believe is generous, but not so generous it couldn't be improved on if she hesitated. He said he'd pay fair, that she wouldn't find better from anyone in the county, and that a woman in her position might find it easier to, he paused, adjusted the word before it landed, relocate. She let the pause sit. Then she said she wasn't interested in relocating. She said it plainly, without apology, the way she said most things. His smile stayed but changed quality. He looked past her toward the cabin, and she did not turn to see what he saw, because she already knew. She had heard the hammer fall quiet when the buckboard came up the road. He walked to the well, just to look, he said. He put his hand on the stone casing and looked down into it. The pause was 1 beat longer than it needed to be. She watched him and said nothing. He came back. He told her the offer would stand for a while, that she should think on it, that there was no hurry. He said he respected what she had built here, and then looked at the cabin roof when he said it. The stranger was on the roof, a row of shingles laid and the next one in his hand. He was not looking down. The rancher looked at him for a moment. Then he put his hat back on, walked to his buckboard, and climbed up. He drove out the way he had come in, still unhurried, and the stranger drove the next nail home while the dust was still settling on the road. The days settled into a shape. She was up before light, fire built, water on, bread started before the sky turned gray at the edges. He was up shortly after, she could tell by the sound of the side door, the particular way it caught if you did not lift the handle slightly before pulling. He had learned to lift it. She noticed that he had learned it without her saying anything. He took his coffee to wherever the work was. She took hers to the table and went over what needed doing. Then they did it, separately, the property between them like a thing they were both responsible for, without having agreed to be. The cellar door had hung wrong since the second winter. He found it in the first week and did not say anything about it. One morning she came out and it was plumb, rehung on new hardware, the old hinges set on the woodpile for scrap. She did not thank him. There was nothing to say that the fact of it did not already say. The cracked beam in the far corner of the fence run had been her worry since March. She had sistered a board against it herself, nailed it as tight as she could manage, knew it wasn't enough. She came out one afternoon to find him bolting a second sister into place, a drill brace turning slow and even in his hands. He did not look up. She watched him for a moment and went back to what she had been doing. The fences ran tighter by the end of the second week. The well casing had a new cap she had not asked for. The boy appeared sometime around the third week. He came to the property line and stood there the way children stand when they want to watch but do not want to be sent away, very still, trying to take up as little space as possible. The stranger noticed him. He did not wave him over or speak to him. He just kept working, and after a while the boy understood that the watching was permitted and came a little closer. By the fourth week, the boy was on the property most afternoons. He never spoke much. He handed things when they were needed and did not get in the way. She was at the doorway one afternoon when she heard the stranger's voice, low, unhurried, just a few words. She looked out. He had the boy's hand in his, showing him how to hold the nail. 2 fingers, not a fist. Set it at the angle the wood wants. Let the hammer do the work. The boy tried it. The nail went in clean. The stranger looked up then, the way a person does when they feel a presence. The boy looked up a half-second later. She was already turning back into the kitchen by the time either of them could have seen her face. The root cellar had needed organizing since March. She had been putting it off the way she put off anything that required her to be still in a small, dark space for longer than a few minutes. But the stranger had repaired the cellar door that week, new leather hinges, a wooden latch that actually caught, and she had run out of reasons. She went down on a Tuesday morning when he was at the far fence line. The crates she moved first, then the dried goods, counted and restacked, then the tin box she kept for papers, receipts, seed records, the note from the bank she had paid off in the second year. She pulled the lid open and went through it the way she always did, methodically, one sheet at a time, knowing what she would find before she found it. The folded document was at the bottom, beneath everything else. She almost set it aside. The paper was older than the others, yellowed at the folds, the kind of document that looks like it has been waiting a long time and has grown patient about it. She opened it. It was the homestead filing, the original. The date was April 1878, 4 years ago, 6 months before the first fence post went in the ground. She had filed it herself. She remembered the morning she had walked into the land office, the agent who had taken her money without looking up. She remembered thinking she would need to bring her husband's name back in once she had built enough to matter, once there was something worth protecting. But she had not. She had never corrected anything. Her name was the only name on the document. She sat down on the cellar floor. It was cool down there, the light coming in narrow from the open door above, and she sat with the paper in both hands and read it again, because the first time might have been wrong. It was not wrong. Her name, her filing, her land, not held in trust, not transferred, not contingent on any marriage or any death. Hers in the original instrument, before the house was raised, before the well casing was driven, before the years that came after. She sat with that for a long time. All the things she had believed she was doing alone, she had been doing alone. That part was true. But all the things she had believed she was doing in secret, quietly, under the tolerance of a husband whose name would eventually be needed, that part was not. She had been the holder of this land from the beginning. There had never been a single day when it was not. She did not know how she felt about that. She folded the document along its original creases and put it into her apron pocket. When she came up out of the cellar, the stranger was still at the far fence, his back to her, his hammer moving in its steady rhythm. She went inside and said nothing. 3 days after she found the deed, he saddled the horse before breakfast and rode into Harlan's Crossing without a word. She watched him go from the kitchen window, his back straight, the canvas bag absent, just the man and the road and the early light still gray along the ridge. She did not ask. She had not built what she had built by asking questions that would not be answered plainly. She worked the morning alone, split kindling, patched the gap in the south corner of the root cellar where frost had pushed the stones apart over winter. The boy appeared at the fence line around mid-morning and watched her work without offering to help, which she had come to understand was his version of company. The stranger came back before dark, as he had said he would, by saying nothing at all. He unsaddled the horse himself, watered it, came inside and ate supper without volunteering where he had been. She did not ask. The food was on the table and they ate, and the lamp burned between them, and that was the whole of it. 3 days after that, the letter came. The county recorder's seal in the upper left corner. She recognized it before she broke the wax. Her hands were steady. She had trained them to steadiness over 14 months, and they did not fail her now. She read it once. She read it again. The language was dry and bureaucratic and almost beautiful in its precision. The deed to the 120-acre homestead registered in the territory of Wyoming under her name had been formally clarified, not altered, the letter was careful to say, clarified, in accordance with the original filing instrument, the instrument that had been drawn before the house was framed, before the well casing went in, before anything that came after. The clarification was now a matter of county record. Any subsequent claim against the property would be measured against this primary document. She stood in the yard with the letter in both hands. Across the yard, he was working the east fence line. She could hear the hammer, the same steady rhythm it had been for 6 weeks now, unhurried, each stroke placed with the same exactness as the one before it. She watched the line of his back, the way he did not look up. He had ridden into town. He had sat in some county office and paid whatever small fee a clarification required. He had come home before dark and eaten supper and said nothing. She folded the letter along a clean crease. She went inside. She opened the tin box where the original deed already sat, its edges soft with handling, and she placed the letter on top of it. She closed the lid. When she came back to the doorway, he was still at the fence, the hammer still moving. The boy had appeared at the property line again, watching. She went back to her work. The sky to the west was pulling in darker. The sky had been pulling in for 2 days before it finally broke. Not rain, just a flat gray ceiling that settled over Harlan's Crossing and stayed, pressing the heat down into the dust, making the horses restless and the well rope slick to the touch. She was in the yard on a Thursday morning when the boy came at a run instead of his usual slow drift to the property line. He handed her a folded document without a word, the way children carry things they do not understand but know to be serious, and then he stood there looking at her face. She looked at it long enough for him to see that she was not afraid. Then she said, "Go on home now," and he went. She carried the document inside and set it on the table and read it twice. The land agent's name was at the bottom. The claim was precisely what she had expected and precisely what she had hoped would not come. That her late husband's debts, 4 notes outstanding with the Territorial Bank at the time of his death, constituted a prior encumbrance against the homestead title, and that her claim to the property was therefore irregular and subject to review. She read it a third time. Then she pulled the tin box from the shelf and took out everything in it and spread it across the table. The deed, the letter from week 6, the original filing, a receipt from when she had broken ground on the root cellar in the spring of 1878, which had her name on it because she had been the one to order the timber. She began to organize. He came in at dusk and saw the table and did not ask. He went to the stove and checked the coffee pot and found it empty and made more and sat down at the far end of the table with his own cup. After a while, he went to bed. She kept working. The lamp burned down and she trimmed it and lit a second one. The papers built into a kind of argument on the table, not one she had planned, but one that kept revealing itself the longer she looked. The deed filed in 1878, her name on the timber receipt, the letter of clarification, The dates lined up in a way the land agent's claim did not account for. Outside, the wind had come up. She could hear it against the window glass. Sometime past midnight, without her having heard him rise, a cup appeared at her elbow, hot. The smell of it reached her before she turned. He was already moving back toward the dark of the bedroom. She picked up the cup. She kept working. The hearing was held on a Tuesday, in a room above the assayer's office that smelled of pipe smoke and old paper. She sat on one side of a scarred table. The land agent sat on the other with a man in a gray coat who had come up from Cheyenne. There was a justice of the peace, the same one who had married her 6 weeks before, and he read everything twice before he set it down. The re-registered deed was 3 pages. The original instrument was 1. Together they said what they needed to say without flourish. The man in the gray coat asked 2 questions and then stopped asking questions. The land agent said the filing was irregular. The justice read the dates again. The filing was not irregular. It took 40 minutes. She walked back to the homestead along the road, not the short way through the field, because she needed the length of it. The sky was high and pale, and the grass on either side had gone the color of straw. She walked at the pace she always walked. When she came through the gate, the stranger was splitting wood at the side of the cabin. He looked up once. She went inside. She made herself a cup of coffee and stood at the window and drank it. That was the end of it. The land agent left Harlan's Crossing the following Thursday. Whether he resigned his position or was quietly asked, she did not learn and did not pursue. The banker nodded to her on the street 2 weeks later and did not meet her eyes. The neighboring rancher had his fence line surveyed again and found it exactly where it had always been and did not speak of the matter further. The town adjusted the way towns do, by simply relocating its attention. She waited until the morning after his departure before she walked the perimeter. She went out before light, before the birds were fully started, with only the sound of her own steps in the grass and the cold that still came off the ground in the early hours of late summer. She walked the east fence line first, then south, then the long western run where the land dropped slightly toward the creek. She walked slowly. She did not count anything or measure anything. She just moved through it. 120 acres. She had turned the first post herself. She had stretched the first wire herself. She had carried water for the well casing in buckets across uneven ground in her 2nd year, before she had a cart. She came back through the north gate as the sun cleared the hills. The smell of wood smoke reached her before she reached the porch, then eggs, then coffee. She did not slow her pace. He was on the porch when she came through the gate. She registered him the way she registered the smoke and the eggs, as a fact of the morning, already settled into its place. He had his coffee. His hands were around the cup. He was looking out at the near field the way he sometimes did, without urgency, without appearing to be waiting for anything. She stepped up onto the porch and reached for the door. That is when she saw it. A single nail driven into the post above the frame, flush with the wood, set clean and without flourish, the head dark against the pale grain. She had not seen it go in. She did not know what morning he had done it, or what hour, whether she had been in the root cellar or out past the west fence, or simply not looking in the right direction. She stood there. The smell of the coffee was on the air. A meadowlark called once from somewhere past the near field and did not call again. She looked at the nail for long enough that the moment had a shape to it, a beginning, a middle, a place where she understood what she was looking at. He had worked his way through the entire property. She knew that now, standing here, not as an act she had witnessed, but as an accumulation she had been living inside without naming it. The well casing, the gate hinge, the fencing, the step, the deed, which she had found refiled and correct, her name alone, a small fee notation in the county register, in handwriting that was not hers. He had gone through the structure of this place the way a careful man goes through a structure, looking for the thing that will fail, addressing it, moving on. And now the nail above the door. Sound. She let out a breath that had been held in some form for 14 months. Not all at once. Slowly, the way cold ground gives up its cold, gradually, without ceremony, because the season has simply turned. She turned. He was already looking back out at the field. His coffee was half gone. He did not look at her. She went inside. The stove was low but holding. She took the second cup from its hook. She poured it full and came back out and set it on the railing beside him. She did not sit. She stood at the railing and looked out at the same field he was looking at. 120 acres. the grass still wet with the night in the low places. The fence line running true all the way to the creek. The door stayed open behind her. Neither of them said anything. The morning continued.